Let's do it. All right. I think we're doing it. I think we're on now. Welcome, welcome. I see several of you already joining me here on Zoom, and I hope we also have people joining me on Facebook Live. We are here for an August happy hour tonight. And as usual, I would love for those of you who are not only in Zoom, but also on Facebook Live, to type in the comments or the chat section if this is your first time in one of the happy hours. I'd love to know that. And I'd also like to know what is in your glass, because that's how we've always started out these happy hours is, what's in your glass? What are you sitting back and relaxing with? And as I often say to you, it doesn't matter what is in your glass. What matters is that we are here together, pausing to take time to be together and enjoy each other and plants and celebrating the garden. So I'll tell you what's in my glass today as we get started. I have made a blackberry cocktail. And of course, I'm not drinking it yet because, let me stir it here with my finger. All right. Because I don't Zoom and drink. But what I did was I took a handful of blackberries, a big handful of blackberries, and I crushed them in a strainer and put the blackberry juice in this glass. And then I added some agave syrup to make it sweet. For per drink, if you don't like real sweet cocktails, I would recommend around a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons per drink. If you like sweet cocktails, then you would want more agave syrup. After that, you add the spirit of your choice, ice cubes, and sparkling water up to the top. If you don't want an alcoholic beverage, you don't put in the spirit, you just put in the ice cubes and the sparkling water. And then you top it with a blackberry. And I'm going to assemble this later when I can enjoy it. But a blackberry cocktail to celebrate blackberry season is what's in my glass right now. So let me invite you to type into chat what is in your glass. I would love to know if this is your first time on a happy hour with me. If this is the first time, or even as a reminder for those of you who have been with me before, what we do is I go through the presentation that I have prepared, and then I take your questions in chat. So what you do is you go to that speech bubble that's either at the bottom or the side of your screen if you're on Zoom, or the comment section if you're with me on Facebook, and you type in your question. And after I go through my presentation, then we come back to those questions, and I'm happy to answer them as much as time allows up until 6 o'clock. If you have typed in a question in the comments section on Facebook, I will answer that on Facebook later, either later this evening or tomorrow. And if we don't get to all the questions in the chat section, then I will answer those questions on the Hyannis Country Garden blog later, because I can save the chat and answer the questions that we don't get to. Well, you all are very quiet. Nobody has chimed in as to whether this is your first time or you've been here before, or what is in your glass. So I'm assuming that you've all taken a deep breath and you're relaxed and we're ready to go. All right. And as questions occur to you, do put them in chat. But let's get right to the subject today, which is, which is, here we go. And we're going to play the slideshow, the August happy hour. All right, that's what we're talking about today, because it is August and there's a lot on our minds. There's a lot going on in our yards and gardens. And there is, I know, a lot on your mind. You may be having problems with certain things. Do type those questions into chat and we will deal with them in a little bit. But I'm going to talk about all aspects of the garden and what's going on right now, because it's a really lovely time. although it has been a very stressful summer. We'll get to all of that in a minute. But right now it is a very bountiful time in the garden. My pear tree is weighted down with pears. The various summer phlox are blooming. There is a lot going on, and that's what we're here to celebrate. And we're going to start off with a few things about perennial gardens at this time of year. Now, I am celebrating tonight Verbena bonariensis. If you have it, you know why I love it. If you don't have it, put this on your must-grow list for next year. It's easy to grow from seed, number one. The seeds, you can just buy some Verbena bonariensis seeds and scatter them in your garden. If you purchase plants and plant them in your garden, it will self-seed. In some areas, this is a perennial plant. Here, I would call it a short-lived perennial, or maybe even a self-seeding, not quite so hardy annual. Either way, once you have it, you always have it. And it is good for several things. First of all, it is a wonderful plant for use for bouquets. It combines beautifully with the other plants that are in bloom at this time of year. As you can see, it is a butterfly favorite as well. It is a good nectar source for butterflies. And because it's on such thin stems, it works well in with other plants. It plays well with others. Whether it is in an annual or perennial garden, it can grow in between other plants and add this kind of tall and spiky presence above some of your other plants. One of my must-grow perennial plants. It is about the end of daylily season, although I did take this picture just 2 days ago, but the daylilies are winding down. And as such, it is time to clean them up. If your daylilies have finished flowering, you will want to go out and cut those stems down so that your garden looks better. And not only that, but you can pull the brown leaves out at the same time, because this is how a lot of our daylilies are looking right now, isn't it? We've got the seed pods. Don't confuse those with buds. The buds on a daylily are long and skinny. Anything that's short, lumpy, and fat, that's a seed pod, and you want to just cut those out of your garden. Sometimes people ask me, can I save those seed pods and plant them? Yes, you can. You will probably get back the plain orange side of the road daylilies, because almost all daylilies are hybrids and they've got that plain orange side of the road daylily in their genetics. So you'll probably get that back, but you might get something else. You just won't get the same plant that made those seed pods. So it can be a fun thing if you want to do that, by all means. There are a couple of ways to clean a daylily up. One is to very carefully cut out all those long stems down into the plant and then carefully pull those brown leaves out. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to just take your either shearing tool or your hedge trimmers and chop that whole plant off down about to an inch or two from the ground. And you will find that within a week, the daylily puts out new foliage and looks much better. It does not flower again, but it will put out new foliage and be a nicer plant in the garden. And if you are of a mind to poke some fall annuals around that daylily, it kind of cleans up the space so that you can tuck in some mums or other plants, other annuals for flowering through September and into October. The echinacea and the black-eyed Susans are still going full power, flower power. They are still going strong. They are August flowers for sure. In my garden, I mix them with annuals like the Blue Horizon ageratum. Blue Horizon is one of my must-grow annuals. You can buy it in 6-packs at the end of May. Put it on your list for next year, and then plant some in and around your perennials. because they will be a workhorse, colorful blue annual, great cutting flower in a perennial garden well into October. So that's a great plant that's going well. This is an everlasting revolution hydrangea in my garden, and that is still in flower. We will get to hydrangeas in a minute. If you don't have hardy hibiscus in your garden, rush out and get some because hardy hibiscus is really a wonderful perennial at this time of year. This picture was taken 2 days ago, and here we have some sedum down here. We've got the remains of catmint over here. Zinnias, we'll talk about those later, but look at this hardy hibiscus. And this is one of the dark foliage varieties. There are many. This is not my garden, so I don't know which one this is, but there are many stunning ones that give you foliage color early on and this later. And look at them up close. I mean, this blows my mind, these plants. Look at how gorgeous the bud is. Look at how beautiful the calyx is. That's a calyx. That's the part of the flower that's underneath the actual flower petals. And here is a developing seed pod, because this is where a flower was previously, and then it has gone by. And now you have that beautiful lime green calyx and those pink buds and those big flowers. It is just in all phases. This is a stunning plant. And I hope that you have some in your garden too. Hardy hibiscus come back every year, unlike the tropical hibiscus that you might have in a container on your deck or patio. This one grows in the ground. The stems die to the ground in the fall and come back the next year. There are 2 things to know about hardy hibiscus. Number 1, they are very late to break dormancy in the spring. So don't assume that your hardy hibiscus has died if you don't see any new shoots early. When all your other perennials will have come up, the hardy hibiscus waits until it's warmer. So, and here on Cape Cod, that can even be into June, can't it? So know that about your hardy hibiscus. The second thing to know about hardy hibiscus is that there is a little larva that eats the leaves called the hibiscus sawfly larva. If you start to see your leaves looking like Swiss cheese, that's what you've got. Mark on your calendar on July 1st every year to spray this plant on the underside of the leaves with Captain Jack's spinosad, okay, Captain Jack's dead bug brew. And you only have to do it once. It's a natural bacteria. And you coat the underside of the leaves and you're done, and you won't have that Swiss cheese foliage on your hardy hibiscus again. This one is in my garden. This one is a variety called Blue River 2. And the flowers are a good, 10 inches, almost 12 inches in diameter. And they look like freshly starched white linen in the garden. Hardy hibiscus flowers, one flower opens every day and then fades at night. But you have many flower buds, and so you will have hardy hibiscus flowers blooming for about a month in your garden. You can find varieties of hardy hibiscus that are short, medium, and very tall. So look for the plant that works best in your landscape and your garden. Full sun plant. Plant these in full sun, at least 5 hours of dead-on sun, and they will be happy plants. Now, some other plants that are in flower right now, I love the Lobelia cardinalis, our native cardinal flower. If you grow it, you know why I love it. First of all, it's an exclamation point of red in the garden at this time of year. And it does very well in the shade. And if ever there is a spot that needs an exclamation point of red, it's a shade garden in August. So even if you're not a red fan, I think you might like this plant because it is so lovely in shade. The second reason that you might like this plant is that the hummingbirds love it. And so you will see hummingbirds zipping back and forth to your cardinal flower at this time of year. Some of the hostas are still in bloom, and I was appreciating this one. This is a hosta that self-seeded in my garden a few years ago, and I like it because it blooms late. A lot of my hostas bloom earlier, you know, in July, say. This one blooms for me toward the end of August, so I like that about this plant as well. I want to introduce you to volcano phlox. If you're not familiar with the volcano phlox, this is a perennial you should know and grow. And the reason is severalfold. First of all, it is a shorter phlox. It comes into flower in early July. It only gets about 3 feet tall. But the great thing about this is that now in August, as those first flowers go by, if you snip them off, the plant puts out new foliage and more big, gorgeous flowers. Not the little wimpy reblooms that many summer phlox make. Volcano is amazing. And here it shows you what it has done. I have clipped off the flowers here and here and here, the first blooms. This is a picture taken at the end of August last year. And you see that it's produced all this new bright green growth, and it's getting all these new flower buds again. Pretty soon, this will be just as filled with flowers as it was in July. And those flowers continue through September. So volcano phlox is a wonderful variety, shorter, longer flowering, and very resilient plant. Can it get powdery mildew? Yes, it's quite resistant, and it doesn't always get powdery mildew, but in a bad mildew year when it's humid and not much rain, you may get a little powdery mildew on this plant. But it's doesn't always get powdery mildew. So that's a good thing as well, isn't it? Let's talk about hydrangeas. I know it's been a tough year for hydrangeas, hasn't it? Because it has been dry. And many of you may have hydrangeas that have gotten toasted. Let's talk first of all about a few of the paniculatus. This one is a variety called Zinfandel by Proven Winners. And Zinfandel is a doll of a plant. It's very rounded. This is a plant in my garden. I have not pruned it per se. I haven't really done too much to it. I've just let it cook along. It has huge flowers that don't fall over. So that means it's very stem sturdy. And I like that in a paniculata. As you can see, the flowers are turning pink. This is a picture that I took yesterday. And so they started out a brilliant white, and now they are turning pink. They will continue on to be a Zinfandel color of pink once they get to be a little more mature. There are dozens of wonderful new hydrangea paniculata varieties, short, medium, and tall. This one is going to be a big plant, at least 6-7 feet tall and wide. Pinky Winky, one of my favorites with a rather silly name. Pinky Winky is another one that starts out white and it turns pink, but it turns pink from the bottom up on Pinky Winky. It is a lacier flower, and it is a combination of fertile and infertile flowers. This Zinfandel back here, those are mostly infertile flowers. They don't have much to offer the pollinators and the bees. But any hydrangea that has a combination of the big infertile flowers like these here on the bottom where my cursor is, and fertile flowers like this one where the bee is, those are plants that are not only beautiful, but also are good pollinator support plants as well. Pinky Winky turns pink from the bottom up. I like Pinky Winky for several reasons. First of all, it's one of the more upright growing hydrangea paniculatus. And so if you've got a place where you need a more narrow, upright plant, that can get to be about, 7 to 8 feet tall. Pinky Winky is a good one because although it may be 7 to 8 feet tall, it will only be about 4 feet wide because it's more upright and narrow. Lovely, lovely variety. Right now, I've got new flowers starting on my endless summer. As you all know, endless summer is one of the varieties of hydrangeas that blooms both on new and old growth. Now, the majority of flowers on endless summer, and as the other plants that we call remontant hydrangeas, the majority of flowers are on the older growth. So, that's where you get the majority of blooms. But these hydrangeas do produce some flowers on the ends of new canes, and that's happening right now on my endless summer. And so these flowers will be turning that endless summer blue a little bit later in early September. So look for that if you have endless summer plants. Now, you may read that you should deadhead your endless summers. If your the flowers that you had on old wood that came earlier in the summer are browned, by all means clip them off. But this plant doesn't require that in order to make a few new flowers. I'll point out something else in this slide that you may need to be aware of, and that's, see, the leaves down under this plant are a little bit kind of distorted. That's a sign that this plant has chili thrips. Thrips are a very tiny, tiny insect, and chili thrips we have had on our hydrangeas here on the Cape for, about 6 or 7 years now. They're not so problematic that for most plants, you don't really have to treat, although I would encourage you to look closely at your hydrangeas and see if you see any of the leaves that look like this. Excuse me. If you have that kind of knitted together, little bit distorted quality, you probably have chili thrips too. And if you do, here's what you should do. In the fall, when the leaves on this plant turn yellow and fall off, rake them up from underneath the plant. Get rid of any debris that is under the plant, because chili thrips overwinter in the plant debris around hydrangeas. And you can control the population of chili thrips. You don't get rid of them, but you can keep it reasonable. This falls into the category of acceptable level of damage on a plant. It doesn't make the plant look completely ugly, and it certainly doesn't kill the plant, so acceptable level of damage. Annabelle hydrangeas have gone from white to green. In the background here on the right-hand corner, you see a little lime hydrangea. Be aware that little lime is not so little. Little lime, as it gets mature, is 6 feet tall and 6 feet wide. So not so little lime, but still a lovely paniculata. And I love the Annabelles, and I'm encouraging you to pick some of your Annabelle flowers. These are lovely as cut flowers indoors, and they dry kind of nicely too when they're at this green stage. So don't hesitate to pick some of your Annabelles. The blue hydrangeas have remained blue if they haven't dried up and if they are growing in afternoon shade. Those of you who are growing blue hydrangeas in full sun, you will have seen that the flowers are brown and toasted by now. And you may want to consider moving those hydrangeas this fall to another location where they are protected from the afternoon sun. Because if you have a blue, either lace cap or mophead, most of those flowers will last into the fall if they're protected from afternoon sun, whereas they get toasted if they are in full sun locations. The hydrangeas enter at this time of year what we call their antique phase, where the flowers go oftentimes from a brilliant blue to a lavender, or a lavender green, or lavender green and burgundy. I love the transformation of these flowers. Again, you will get good color that lasts into the fall, even in the antique phase, if they're protected from the midday sun. I'm doing a Learn How to Make a Dried Hydrangea Wreath, 2 seminars. One is virtual, and that's coming up on August 28th, where you can register and join me like this virtually online and see how to make a hydrangea wreath from your fresh hydrangea flowers. The second one is an in-person in the store workshop on Sunday, September 18th at 2 p.m. And the registration information will be on the I almost said Hydrangea Country Garden. Will be on the Hyannis Country Garden website coming up probably next week. I will tell you, however, if you want to make a dried hydrangea wreath, don't pick your hydrangeas now, okay? You want to pick the flowers right before you make the wreath. And I will explain all of that in these 2 seminars. The virtual seminar is $10. The in-person seminar is $35 and includes all the materials, except for some hydrangeas. You need to bring in some of your own hydrangeas, and all of that information is on the Hyannis Country Garden events page on the website. Now let's talk about a few other shrubs, all right? And one that I am loving right now, if you don't have it, you might want it, Vitex, AKA chaste tree. And by the way, I didn't mention for all of you folks that are with me here for the first time. Number one, this is being recorded, and so we will have this available either through our website or on our YouTube channel. Number two, I'm doing this on Facebook Live, so the recording will be on Facebook coming up as well. If you don't remember some of these names and you haven't written them down, you can always go back and look at the recording again. You can always take a screenshot of either through your computer or with your phone. So if you want to remember a name, that's a good thing to do as well. Vitex is a plant similar to butterfly bush. I think it's easier than butterfly bush. We'll get to that in a second. It is a plant that blooms right now. It has been in bloom in my garden for at least 2 weeks. It shows no sign of slowing down with these beautiful bright blue upright flowers. What you need to know about Vitex is to cut it back either down to 2 or 3 feet or even down to close to the ground in the early spring. In May, you will look at that plant and you will think it's dead, it's a goner, right? But it's not a goner, it's just very slow to break dormancy like the hardy hibiscus. And what you'll do is you'll cut it down to either 2 feet tall or further down. And very quickly in June, it will put out new growth and it will get to be similar to a butterfly bush, 5 feet tall by midsummer. So be sure to chop it down. That gets rid of the dead wood, that rejuvenates the plant, and it keeps it a reasonable size in your garden as well. Now let's talk about butterfly bush. This is a pugster and a short butterfly bush. I like pugster. I like most butterfly bush, but they do require deadheading to keep them looking their best and to encourage more flowers. This is a plant that you're looking at right now that needs deadheading. What it needs is for you to go out with a pruners or a pair of scissors or a snips and cut off all of these brown flowers right below the brown part. And then in response, the plant will make new growth like you see here and here that will soon produce more flowers. Keep it deadheaded. And once a week going out, go out with the beverage of your choice as an evening activity or the coffee first thing in the morning. And you can sip that wonderful cup of coffee first thing in the morning and deadhead the plant. And by the time your beverage is done, whether it's morning or evening cocktail hour, the plant will look 100% better. It's also time to deadhead your roses to stimulate fall bloom. I have many of my shrub roses right now that they've gone actually through 2 flowering periods. The first one, I deadheaded them, and the second one, Now they are ready for deadheading again, and they will respond with more flowers in September and October. Sometimes our roses on the Cape will still be in bloom for Thanksgiving, or they'll still be in bloom when we get hard frost and you have the pleasure of seeing that beautiful white crystalline frost on your rose blossoms. So get out there soon and clip off what you see here. You don't have to do it in any sort of meticulous way. Ignore that old myth of cutting above a set of 5 leaflets. It is a myth. You don't have to pay any attention to it. No reason to count leaflets in your garden. Just cut them off either with our hedge trimmers, an electric shearing tool, or your hand pruners. Let's talk for a minute about vegetable gardens because, oh, this is the time of year. This is why I put so much attention into a vegetable garden. Because at this time of year, I walk into the garden. This is a quarter of my vegetable garden you see right here. And I say, what's for dinner? And I get 6 or 8 answers. In this quarter of the garden alone, the answer is cucumbers, carrots, green beans, and kale, right? And that's only in this quarter of the garden. In other parts of the garden, the answer is tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. So, you know, the bounty is unbelievable in a vegetable garden. And in order to keep that bounty coming, you want to harvest regularly. Don't let your cucumbers get yellow. They are too ripe when they are yellow. Don't let your eggplants turn a paler shade of lavender. They're too ripe. You want to cut them when they're that dark purple. You can let your peppers turn red. That's a good thing. And of course, pick those tomatoes as they ripen or when they're almost ripe in case the birds are prone to pecking your tomatoes. We'll get to that too in a minute. But the harvest at this time of year is wonderful. And so, you know, what's on the menu? Gazpacho and salads and all kinds of fresh vegetable dishes. The cucumbers should be producing gangbusters at this point. Even my very late planted cucumbers are starting to produce. Sometimes people in home gardens think that they need to wait for their cucumbers to turn really dark green, like the ones from the supermarket. A lot of cucumbers don't turn that dark green in a home garden. So be ready to pick them before they turn yellow. This is not a mature cucumber here. This one probably has another week or so on the vine, but it may not turn that dark green color. Check your zucchini daily and pick them when they're young, because they go from being delicious and small to being the size of doorstops and baseball bats very quickly. And I'm a little bit of a squash snob. I do not cook the big ones. I know you can stuff them. I know you can make zucchini bread. I'm not interested. I want them young and tender and delicious. And this is a Zephyr squash, one of the varieties that is one of my favorites for its nutty flavor. You may want to roast your vegetables. If you have a lot of vegetables, roasting them and freezing them is a great way to preserve them. This is eggplant from my garden. I slice it. I don't peel my homegrown eggplant because the peels are quite tender. I slice it. I roast it at 375 degrees on parchment paper until it's brown like this. I cool it. I put them in plastic bags and freeze them. I do the same thing for green beans, the same thing for zucchini. Roasting vegetables is an easy way to preserve them, and then you can use them in any recipe at all into the winter. Have you grown cucamelons? You have to do it. I was tempted tonight for this to make a cucamelon cocktail because I've got all kinds of cucamelons coming along, and they are like little tiny watermelons. They are literally an inch big. Kids love these. Even kids that don't tend to eat vegetables love these cucamelons because they look like little watermelons. And I recently was with my grandson and a friend of his, and they could not get enough of these. In the evening, we would put these out for a snack, and they disappeared very quickly. Cucamelons are easy to grow from seed. You usually don't find the plants in the garden center. So this is one that you'll want to buy a package of seeds. They make beautiful small vines that are actually hardier than other cucumber vines. They don't tend to get the wilt that many of the other cucumbers do. And they produce these tiny, teeny little cucumbers for a long period of time that make great pickles, great hors d'oeuvres. I've yet to invent the cucamelon cocktail, but maybe next time we'll do that. Now, let's talk about a couple of things that you may have encountered in your vegetable garden. And the first is the tomato hornworm. This looks like an amazing brooch from Tiffany. You know you have a hornworm when you go out to your tomatoes and you see what looks like this, those stems that are right under the letters there. That's tomato hornworm damage. That's what this guy did. I didn't cut those off. This guy ate them off. So if you see that happening on your tomato, you've got a hornworm on there someplace. Look very carefully. They're hidden. They're hard to see, but you will find it's a great big larva. They're almost too fat to squash. What I do is I pick them off of my tomato plants and I put them on my bird feeder for the crows. You can pick them off the tomato plants and toss them in the woods if you want. They turn into sphinx moths, one of the hummingbird moths. So it's not that we, need to banish hornworms from the planet, but you don't want them on your tomato plant. If you find one of these that has little white growths on it that look like white rice, if you find a hornworm that's covered with white rice, leave it. Do not dispose of it, because those are parasites, and those are actually destroying the hornworm from the inside out. It's almost like a little Halloween kind of a thing going on out there. But you don't want to destroy it, because you want those parasites to, go on and multiply and attack more tomato hornworms. So you leave them alone if you see one of these worms covered with grains, what look like grains of white rice. This is what blossom end rot looks like. And no, it's not a lack of calcium that produces this. Do not believe all those posts you see on Facebook telling you to put Tums around your plant or eggshells or any of that nonsense, because this happens when plants are stressed. And the biggest stressor of tomatoes, particularly early on, is uneven watering. And so keep your watering even. Don't hand water. Water with a soaker hose or a sprinkler. Water deeply as your town allows. I know some towns are now saying only hand watering. You have to follow your town guidelines. So if your town is saying only hand watering, then you abide by that, because we have to protect our water sources. But it is uneven watering, drying out and then getting wet, and drying out and then getting wet, that causes blossom end rot. Another thing that can cause it is if you hoe too vigorously or rototill next to your tomato plants so that you chop the roots. That can cause this as well. Let's talk about a few annuals, and I am loving zinnias at this time of year. In this picture, there are actually 3 annuals. I missed the sunflower up here. Look at that sunflower bud up at the top. Look at how gorgeous that is. Sunflowers are worth growing just to see the buds opening. They're so magical. And here is an orange cosmos. Once you grow orange cosmos, you always have them. They self-seed, great. Butterflies love them, bees love them, and I would not be without zinnias, particularly these single zinnias that the bees and the butterflies love. And here are some double varieties. Butterflies come to these too, particularly the ones that have the pollen and nectar sources there. And what you will notice if you grow zinnias, go out right after it has finished raining and look at your zinnias, because you will discover that the bees use zinnias like umbrellas in a rain. They will shelter underneath the flower during the rain. And once the rain stops, then they will come up and get back to work in the zinnia again. It is the beginning of dahlia season, and if you have tall dahlias, be sure to stake them and support them. If you had a stake put in and you haven't tied them up recently, you might want to do that this weekend. Get out there with some twine and tie up those dahlias so that they are supported. And of course, be sure and pick them. Pick them regularly, and that way they will continue to make more. Bring them inside and create your own flower show down your kitchen table or your kitchen counter. I love to put dahlias in singly in recycled clear glass bottles. They make a beautiful flower display inside the house. Keep your containers well watered. It has been brutal, hasn't it? And if your container has succumbed to the drought and the hot weather, by all means, get some new plants to refresh them, because as you well know, our annuals can continue well into October here on the Cape. My containers are in pretty good shape. This one I thought was a particularly wonderful one this year. I combined one of the mandevillas. This one is one of the Suntory yellow mandevillas, and I put that in the middle. And then I put 3 of these Moonlight Night lobularia from Proven Winners, and 3 Balkan geraniums, the window box ivy geraniums. And I love how this came out with the geraniums poking through, and with the pink and the white, the kind of the creamy color of the lobularia alyssum, and then the mandevilla vine. So that was a successful one. This one, not so successful. That was a Biden's with a new variety of Artemisia. I did not use that Artemisia well here. I just poked it in the middle and it looks like a weed. So I will try that Artemisia again and use it with other annuals with purple foliage or lime green foliage, and combine it a little bit more artfully, and it will be better. Now let's talk about your dormant or maybe your dead lawn. This is what we're dealing with, all right? This is what we are calling the Triscuit lawn. It is brown and it is crunchy, like a Triscuit, right? And if you have not watered a lawn at all this summer, this is probably what you have. If you've watered a little bit, or if you've had shady parts in your garden, then your lawn is probably dormant, but not dead. And there are definitely parts of this lawn that are dormant, but not dead. But there may be parts of this lawn that have actually died. Because when turf grass gets too dry, the crown of the plant dies too. And only time will tell whether your plants, your lawn, your turf grass is going to revive or not, all right? If you want to revive your lawn in early September, you want to rake it. You might even want to take the opportunity to aerate, but before you top dress with compost, you top dress with some compost and you put down seed and you water daily until the seed germinates. That is the way to restore a lawn. We have a lawn restoration seminar coming up with our own Jamie Deeks. Deeks is our lawn guru at Hyannis Country Garden. He loves the subject, he's passionate about it, and he's passionate about organic means of having a beautiful lawn. And he is going to be giving a virtual presentation about lawn restoration. He does a deep dive into it. And that's going to be Thursday, September 1st at 4 o'clock. It is free. You can register on the events page. It will also be recorded, so you can watch it later. And he will be doing a similar presentation in the store live later on in September. So watch the events page for information about that. Now I want to do some FYI before we get to questions. Get ready to type your questions in chat, but here's little seasonal plant FYI from my walk around the garden center today. The mums are in. And you can just barely see at the top of this picture, we've got some construction going on. We are rebuilding the annual shade frame. It's very exciting. But in the meantime, we've got that sort of positioned off, and we've got annuals for filling in your bare areas or your containers, sprucing up if maybe you're having a barbecue or a rehearsal dinner or something. You may want some mums now, even though we think of them as fall flowers, for sprucing things up. I will tell you this about this type of chrysanthemum. Many people buy them at this time of year. They plant them in their gardens, and then they complain that the mums don't come back. And they say, well, I thought they were supposed to be hardy. They're called hardy mums. Well, they're not called hardy mums because they're bred to be reliable perennials. That's number one. They are called hardy mums because they are hardy through the first few frosts. That's why they're called hardy mums. You can increase your odds of getting them back, however. And what you have to do is this. You have to plant them as soon as you bring them home, and you have to water them regularly. So keep watering those plants at least once a week through September and October, even though they have finished flowering, even though we might have had some hard frosts. Keep watering them because they have a root system the size of the pot, right? And so if you let that dry up, the plant is going to die over the winter because the root system has dried up. So that's key number one to keeping these from year to year. Water them from the time you plant them into the fall. Tip number two for keeping these alive year to year. Don't cut them back in the fall. Leave the dead and brown stems and the dried leaves there through the winter. It has some protective value for the plant, and you are much more likely to get a marginally hardy plant back in the spring if you leave the top of the plant and don't clean it up in the fall. Only cut it down in the spring, and you're more likely to get these back. We have a few wonderful and fun plants in right now. These are black pearl peppers. Right now, you don't see what they're going to do, but what they're going to do is form shiny black pearls, ornamental peppers. And this makes a great plant to refresh your containers with because it brings both foliage color and those shiny peppers. Anytime I have my garden on tour in the fall and I have this plant in containers, it's always one people ask about because it's so beautiful. And speaking of colorful and texture foliage, we've got the fiber optic grass and the curly whirly juncus in as well. These are beautiful mixed in with your annuals and a great way to refresh containers. The other great thing to do with these plants is once you buy a pumpkin, you can use these for hair in the pumpkin. So you can cut, the top on the pumpkin and either just stick the whole pot right into the top of the pumpkin for hair, or you can put a little soil in there and plant the fiber optic grass or the curly whirly juncus, and you can plant that in the top of a pumpkin or a gourd, and you have a wonderful porch arrangement into the fall. And a word about the asters that come in. We get these beautiful asters that are pink or blue or purple. And just know that when you plant these, they will come back next year, but they're probably not going to be as short and round as you see them here. They are sheared at the grower. Sometimes they are given growth regulators to keep them a little smaller. That makes them a wonderful round, compact size in your garden this fall. But next fall, they will probably be taller and skinnier. And either you need to be prepared to shear them, or the other thing you can do is next spring, you can pop them out of wherever you put them in the garden this fall and put them more toward the middle or the back of your perennial garden and let them be tall asters. Okay, well, we have reached the end of the presentation, and I hope that you keep in touch. We're going to come and stop the share. We're going to go to chat, and I do not see any of you posting questions in chat. So would somebody type something in chat so that I know that it's working? Someone who has been with me in the past, type, "It's working, CL," into chat so that I can see that it is working, because right now I don't see anything in chat, and maybe you don't have any questions. Let's see, we have 2 people have raised their hands, and I usually don't go to raised hands in these, but let's look here and see. Lower hand. No, people are raising hands, but I don't see. Okay, Linda, I can hear you. Do you want to either tell me a question, or do you want to tell me why we can't type in chat? Linda or Claudia? No?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Claudia. Is there a problem with?
Yes, there is. There is. You can't chat. It's disabled.
Chat is disabled. All right. I'm so okay. Well, I'm going to go down the list. Did you have a question, Claudia?
I do. I don't know if it's helpful. I'm not where I can post a picture. I just moved here to the Cape a year ago, and in our backyard, which is Triscuity, we have all wildflowers in the front. We're trying, and the back is just pretty average. But we had these 2 azaleas, and they looked beautiful, and one ended up virtually as dead as a doornail. I can't figure out, I don't see a lot of spider mites, but it actually just turned into fried little leaves, and the other looks just fine. And I'm trying to diagnose what it is besides, cropping it back to almost nothing. I don't know what that could be.
Right. Without seeing a picture, it's a little hard for me to comment, but I would say that this has been a brutal year for heat and drought. And I think that's fine that you've chopped it back to nothing, and just wait and see what happens. And if you want to bring a picture in next Friday to me at Country Garden, or email me one, I'm happy to comment on it. All right.
Wonderful. And lastly, it is, I'm not sure what the people did, but all of the roots of it seem to be very exposed. Should I put mulch around it to protect them?
Well, it could be that it whatever was protecting the roots washed away. That's going to, of course, make the plant more susceptible to drought. So a light application of mulch would not hurt.
Wonderful. Now, thank you.
Somebody try and type something in chat now, because I think maybe I have fixed it. So yes, chat is working. Okay, so let's go back to doing this through chat, because that is a little bit faster. And so you can type a question in chat for me, and I will be happy to answer as time allows. And if we don't get to it, as I told you, I'll answer on the blog. Angel Face Wedgwood Blue, annual or perennial? It is an annual in this area. It is an annual anywhere in the Northeast. And you can cut off any of those stems that have finished flowering, cut back down into the plant. That will make it more likely to bloom some more into the fall. All right. Mandevilla is finally growing up the trellis very slow. Barbara, some mandevillas are not the tall ones that go up trellises, and I don't know which variety you have, but you might have one of the ones that is not a tall climbing variety. So you may check that, take a picture of it and email it to me at clfornari@countrygarden.com, and I'll tell you if you've got the variety that is the shorter less likely to climb up a trellis variety, okay? Usually the ones that are big, grow big up a trellis, when you buy them, they're already pretty large, okay? The ones that are more compact when you buy them are more likely to stay compact. My hydrangeas have never bloomed. Could they be planted in too shaded a spot? Carla, maybe, but usually as long as hydrangeas are getting some direct sun, even the dappled sunlight through trees, they will flower. So one thing to know is what variety you have, because there are some hydrangeas that are just not as bud hardy as others. Your hydrangeas right now, all of your blue hydrangeas, your mop heads, your lace kebs, they have the germ of next year's flower right now on that plant. If that bud does not make it through the winter, they will not flower. If anybody is cutting that hydrangea back or down in the fall or the spring, they will not flower. So I would, question whether you have a variety like Big Daddy that is just not very bud hardy. My neighbor across the street has a Big Daddy out near the road. It blooms once every 8 years because it's just not very bud hardy, and those buds don't make it through the winter. So that might be your problem. Our squash got invaded by squash beetle. Will they die off in the winter, or is there a treatment now to have less chance of them for next year? Great question. Number one, the area where they grew, you want to turn that soil over in the late fall, like October. You want to, that exposes a certain number of the overwintering pupa that are in the ground to the winter conditions to kill them off. So that's number one. Number two, I think you're probably talking about the squash borer that makes the vine wilt. I'm assuming you are. And if that's the case, next year, one thing to do is starting early in the season when they first start to grow, you dust the top of the stems either with wood ashes or diatomaceous earth. If you don't have a wood stove, don't use stuff from your barbecue grill, but wood stove ashes or fireplace ashes, great. And you dust that, keep the tops of the vines covered with that. The moth that lays the egg that turns into the borer doesn't like to crawl through the diatomaceous earth or the ash to lay its egg underneath. And you can within a couple of years, get rid of them that way so that you don't have to dust anymore in the future. First time viewer and hibiscus iced tea. Excellent. Thank you, Carrie. I'm so sorry that the chat was turned off. I will have to remember to check that next time. We've never had that problem before. So now I've learned something new here. I've been adding to my compost bin since spring. Should I spread the compost on my garden this fall or wait till spring? If you can do it, stop adding to it now. If you spread it now, you're going to have a mix of compost and the stuff that you added last week, right? Which is not necessarily bad. There are two things that you can do. In my household, we have 2 bins. So at a certain point, we stop adding to one bin and we let that sit and maybe tumble it a time or two for the rest of the fall, and then either empty it very late fall or early next spring. So you could do that with 2 different bins. The second thing you can do is empty the bin, scrape away the stuff that you've recently added, the eggshells and broccoli stems that are still identifiable as such, and then spread the rest of it now. So you can do that as well. So either one is fine. Don't worry if your compost doesn't look like it looks in the magazines and the pictures. If it doesn't look like, fresh green earth, a fresh brown earth and all homogeneous, don't worry about that. You will be able to see those avocado pits. You will be able to see those eggshells. You will be able to have some leaves and all that aren't fully composted. That's okay. Put that in your gardens anyway. That's still gold for the garden. So know that. I'm going to do one more question, and I'm saving the chat here. Save chat. I've clicked on that so that the rest of the questions I can answer later on our blog at hyanniscountrygarden.com. All right. One of my old lace cap hydrangeas has dried up and looks like twigs. There are just a few green stalks left. Should I cut the dried twigs down to the ground now? Margaret, the percentage play is to leave them at this point because they may still be viable for next year and they may have the germ of flowers still. If that were my plant, I would wait and I would then cut it down next May, when you can clearly see what's living and what's dead. By the middle of May, third week in May, you will be able to say, yes, this stalk, is still living and has growth on it. This stalk is bare at the middle of May and is dead, and I'm going to cut it out. So I think that's the percentage play, is to wait and to cut it back next spring when you can see what's living and what's dead. All right, well, I will get to the rest of your questions on the Hyannis Country Garden blog that will probably be up tomorrow. And I am so appreciative that you stuck with me today and that you were patient with that silly chat not working. And I look forward to being back with you with another happy hour or one of our Sunday seminars. Do check the events page for all events that are coming up at hyanniscountrygarden.com. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Try to stay cool and pray for rain.